about water and urban places. This is Ideanthro. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ideanthro. And welcome back to Front of Mind Season 1, where we nab ourselves a guest from this broader water industry, in this case landscape industry as well, and sit down and have a chat about what's on their mind, what's interesting them, puzzling them, fascinating them, some word of that nature. Our guest today is Amalie Wright. Now Amalie is a landscape architect, runs her own private practice, landscapeology, which does work right from like the household garden scale up to the broader policy and planning space, including in our water world. Mm-hmm. So I reached out to Amalie because she's been involved in all sorts of interesting projects like the Living Waterways framework. I was like, look, Amalie, I've got this series coming up. What is on the front of your mind? And you responded with a photograph.
Yes.
Do you want to tell everyone what that photograph was? And I suspect the conversation will blossom from there.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on. It's great to be part of this highly acclaimed and very popular series.
I feel like you're taking the mickey out of
Not
me,
at all.
Amalie.
No. Yeah, so the photo I've been, one of the things I really enjoy doing is just having a trawl through the State Library of Queensland's photo archives.
Okay.
So they've got an amazing collection of photos, and there's one that caught my eye recently, which is a photo taken underneath the Indooroopilly Bridge, mm-hmm. and it's of people. The whole scene is filled with people swimming in the river. So there's a beautiful white sandy beach, and there's people swimming in the river. They're having picnics, they're relaxing. It looks like basically a beach scene.
Yeah, it looks like if you're Currumbin or somewhere like that.
And then you can see the bottom of the bridge over the top, and the shadow of the bridge falling over the water. And it's just such a beautiful photo full of such joy and happiness, and people unselfconsciously relaxing and enjoying themselves in their city and in a part of their city. And it made me think, well, you know, we don't do that anymore. No one thinks, let's go down and just have a relaxing afternoon swim in the Brisbane River.
No. You might roll on it. You might catch a city cat.
Absolutely.
You might even sit beside it at South Bank, but you're not going to swim in it if you're sane.
That's right.
Although I know you might realise that I've been doing some slacklining recently.
Yeah.
And people set up water lines across the Brisbane River, as in the safety is falling into the river, which I think's a little nuts. But anyway, that's an aside. So some people do still end up swimming in it.
Yeah, no, people do end up swimming in it, but it just made me think. You know, other cities in Australia and around the world have made it their ambition, and they've got taglines about, you know, swimming in the river again, and let's make our river or our harbour or our waterway swimmable again.
Yep.
And also the fact that that also intrigues me is that this isn't that long ago.
Yeah, when was the
it's
photo
less
taken?
than 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's in sort of, you know, our grandparents would remember it.
Yeah.
My grandparents maybe would remember it.
My grandfather and grandmother are 90 and still alive, so they probably would remember it.
Yeah. But it's the sort of thing that has just vanished from our communal memory of how we have at one stage experienced this city.
Yeah.
And one of its most dominating landscape elements, which is the river.
Yes.
And as you go trawling further through the photos, you see lots of people swimming at waterholes and creeks and things, which we still do to maybe a lesser extent in the big municipal rivers, and lots of sea baths, you know, lots of enclosures that have been built for people to bathe in the Brisbane River. There are some right in the inner city.
Really?
Yep,
okay.
Down near Customs House and those places right in the inner city, as well as coastal ones, which we're probably more familiar with.
Yep.
And ones that have been built further up the coast that were built for stinger enclosures as well as bathing enclosures.
Yep.
So there was this sort of real process of infrastructure associated with bringing people to the river and being able to enjoy it. And I think it's just interesting that, you know, there's really good reasons that we don't do that anymore. We now have lots of municipal swimming pools, and the water quality of the river is such that it makes it hard to embrace those sort of things.
Yep.
But the more I started looking at how people over time have battled the heat, you know, by being able to go for a dip, you then start to see that our relationship with water in this state and in this country is really, really broad ranging.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, so I mean, the thing that strikes me is that where there are still the opportunities to swim in creeks and rivers, and like even in southeast Queensland, people take it up. You only have to go out to places like Sanford, Tamborine,
Yep.
and suddenly you get lots of people travelling to swim there, which is
Yep.
me.
Yeah.
But also lots of people who live there just make use of it. Now maybe there's an argument of, well, did they choose to live there because of that, and like correlation versus causation, but it strikes me that when the opportunity's there, people embrace it and want it. But when the opportunity is a much less clean, weedier, inaccessible location like where we are, still nice that it's a creek, nice that it's a riparian area, but it's not enticing me down into the creek behind us by any means.
No.
It gets me thinking about how do we make those opportunities for people.
And there were other spots along the Brisbane River. You can see other photos and postcards of on Kangaroo Point, where the Story Bridge goes across now, where one of its abutments is. Under there is probably one of the closest parts in the inner city where you can get right down to the water's edge.
Yes.
The land just shelves right off really gently into the river.
Which, unsurprisingly, is where people slackline and fall in the river.
Yeah, that's right. But that was, a beach kind of setting at one stage where you would go, where the community gathered kind of thing with the water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would you, so where do we, like, where does this information go? So I love the concept of being able to swim in the river, and I love the story of it, and I love the thought of people doing it. For someone who's a little down the technical bent of things, where does this become real and tangible for us in our work?
Yeah, good question. I guess I've been thinking about that, but from the point of view that when we're talking about these issues, we don't just talk to each other in the profession about it. So you need to convince other people to come along the journey with you. So you need to convince decision makers, you need to convince other people who live in these areas, your fellow citizens of where you're working, and who don't have the same technical knowledge that you have.
Sure.
But stories, I think, go a long way. There's lots of stories, even back to when we think of water in this country. The rainbow serpent is one of the oldest stories about water.
Yep.
And we as Europeans who've come here, we know that story that's come from the traditional owners, and it's really simple. You could tell it to a child, which is part of the oral storytelling tradition.
Which is exactly where I know it from. Actually, one of my favourite storybooks as a kid was of Tiddalik the Frog.
Tiddalik the Frog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that story.
Yeah. So anyone can understand that the rainbow serpent, when the rainbow is in the sky, that there's rain around.
Yep.
And when the lake or the billabong or the waterhole is dry, it's because the rainbow serpent has moved on to the next place where there's water and there's drought. And it's a really easy way to understand that. There's also really scientific reasons behind all that.
Sure.
We could talk about El Nino and El Nina, and we can talk about the weather cycle, and we can talk about the seasons and drawdown of water and where it comes from and catchments and all that sort of stuff. And that is telling the story in a different way.
Yeah.
But I think that there's something in the way we tell stories that can bring people on the journey with us.
Well,
yeah.
I was just thinking as you were describing that, it reminded me of something I've looked into a couple of times, but just recently reading a book which talked about one man's journey looking into memory sport. So people who remember, huge numbers of cards, numbers, shuffle decks of cards, poetry off by heart, all sorts of things. And when you delve into that and delve into how people do well in that sport, have you heard about this?
No, I haven't.
The way they do it
is
they attach story to everything. So a deck of cards isn't, just the 7 of clubs. The 7 of clubs, essentially for any card, you would attach one method of doing it would be to attach a name, an object, and an action to it. So it might be, I'll steal from the book, Einstein moonwalking. That's the title of the book, Moonwalking with Einstein. And an object. You have a cricket ball or something. And so you get multiple cards in a row and you attach ridiculous stories to them, because suddenly it becomes Einstein up a tree, with a banjo,
Yeah.
and it sticks in your mind, and you
Yeah.
place it somewhere because it's story.
Yeah.
So it strikes me that there's an analogy here to this, which is the case of, okay, maybe there's a place for facts and figures to do the convincing,
Yeah.
but maybe we need the story for it to stick and have meaning.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the combination
Well, I
of the two.
still remember my very easy memory jingle seems useful naming planets, which is how you remember the first letter of the planets.
Yep.
And King Philip chose orange flowers going south, which is kingdom, phylum, order. How you remember the
I was going, what's that one?
nomenclature of.
Yep. It's
of,
like never eat soggy wheat mix, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So, so yes, there's a reason why we use those, because they work and they stick with you.
Yep.
And even though something, sometimes we tend to look down on something that's aimed at children as being, too dumb or too lower order.
Mm-hmm.
But if a child can explain it to someone else, then everyone's capable of understanding it.
Yep.
And I think that, when you just start to dig around in the history of how people have lived in this country and how they've had relationships with water, that there's lots of stories about how we live with water that I think can that we could learn from, or that we can start to build into how we talk about the more technical processes that we work through.
Do you have an example of somewhere where you've applied this to make it real for people? Ooh, okay, I'll challenge you
That's
there.
an interesting challenge.
I thought you were going to go, yes.
Of course, yes.
I even thought I knew the project. You were going to say yes, but anyway.
Oh, well, why don't you tell me and I'll tell you if you're right.
I thought you were going to say something to do with Small Creek.
Yeah.
But you go.
No, I'm keen to hear what you think, Jack. I'll tell you if you've got it right or not.
Wonderful. No, really, look, you're going, right?
No, the stories that we got from Small Creek, it came the other way. So that is a project that we were involved in at the concept stage, up front, which, like a commercial project, goes for a defined length of time. Mm-hmm. It starts on that date, it has to be finished by that date. There's this much money attached to it.
Yep.
And you need to find a way of understanding as much as you can about the place that you're working, as you can.
Yep.
And if we hadn't done Design Your Creek Week and set up on site under a tent for a week and said, come and talk to us, we could have sat at our desks Googling or at the library for a year and not found out some of the information that we got from people just coming in and having a chat.
So how did you then use, those stories that you then learned from them, how did they then translate? Because the way I've heard you talk about that before, and clearly it was important and meaningful for you that you learned about them. What then happened next with those stories?
Well, it's really important when you're learning about, when we learn about the types of animals, like the quantum of and diversity of bird life that people had spotted in that corridor over, say, a 20-year period.
Yep.
That a neighbour around the street had an echidna knocking on their back door in the middle of the night. There's a kookaburra flying overhead to give his 2 cents worth. You can't ignore that. You have to build that into how you're designing the habitat, how you're designing, the planting selection, how you're designing the waterway itself, so it can support. People came to tell us we used to be able to catch so and so, or that you can catch this here, or in these wetlands over here, these water bodies in another part of Ipswich, we've seen brolgas come in.
Does that help then with also the sell of what you're trying to do out there? Because it's a case of, well, this might just seem like a drain, but it's this much more than that, because it's this story and that story, and to make it real and connect people to that change that's about to occur.
But I think the important thing is it's not one or the other. It's not story at the expense of technical information, and it's not technical information alone. So I think it's more about making sure that we have as much as at our disposal as we can to when we're working on projects.
Yeah.
So we can just talk about fluvial geomorphology and sinuosity and Manning's N on that project,
Yep.
and the amount of earthworks and how its effect on flow and velocity.
Yep.
And that's really important and essential.
Yes.
And we can also just talk about that it's going to be shady and lovely place and to go and relax beside, and that's also important. But having the two together is what makes it really powerful.
Well, and that reminds me of, as we were walking over before we set up the camera, I mentioned a project I'm working on, which is a design of, in a sense of, it's just like a simple bioretention system or infiltration system upstream of a nature reserve. And of course, we're about to go and do detailed design, and of course, getting the fine nitty-gritty details of that right is super important. But the reason that project more than anything else sticks in my mind is because of the story of, it's this nature reserve, it's got this lovely Melaleuca community in there that's sensitive to hydrologic changes, and the urban area that's upstream of it is having those hydrologic effects on it. And so it gives it meaning for me as to why we're putting that, and that's why it's exciting. Like the detail we need to get right, but the combination with the story is why that's like, oh yeah, I'm really keen to do this. It's more than just a random treatment system. So.
Yeah, I think another thing that's interesting about Small Creek is for a lot of us, or for a lot of people, naming something is important. Something is valued once it's named.
Okay.
And that creek its name wasn't known.
Okay.
So if you said to people, locals, we're working on Small Creek, they didn't know. If you said we're working on that concrete drain that you can see when you go over the Warwick Road Bridge, they said, oh, that one.
Yeah.
So names attached to things, it seems like a really small thing, but then it becomes something that has value and community meaning attached to it.
Okay.
Like the Snowy River.
Yes.
Has developed this sort of place in our national consciousness through Banjo Patterson. You're talking about reciting poetry.
Yep.
There's movement at the station for the word it passed around. So that became important to a nation seeking nationhood around federation, and then it became important to us through the Snowy River scheme. So the name of the Snowy River means something. This is similar, in Tasmania, the name of the Franklin River and the Gordon River became things worth fighting for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny the way your brain went to that, and my brain went there as well, even before you mentioned the name of Franklin. I was like, oh, yeah. So.
Yeah, so the stories that were told about the Gordon and Franklin through Peter Dombrovskis's photographs, they were the tipping point. So, and that was a form of storytelling.
Yes.
His photographs of those areas that were going to be lost because of the dam were the for many people, they were the bits that were instrumental in changing their minds.
Maybe, and so maybe so I'm trying to sit here and relate this back to work that I'm doing. So I'm doing work with a local government looking at what will be their strategy for stormwater treatment going forward. And one of the really profound things that we've discovered is that with our current mix of technologies and space available to do them and how cost effective or not they are, we really don't have enough approaches to cost effectively manage all of our stormwater impacts in the city. We either run out of money or we run out of space first, which frames up then what we might do next in terms of the direction. But one of the things that one of the responses to that when I've told that to people has been, oh, well, it's going to, that's still going to take so long till we use up all those spaces because, or don't worry about that, that's so far down the track. And maybe there's a spot in this for the story, like this story around, well, that's actually not, like, that's not good enough. That's not the vision that I have. My vision is to, a reasonable amount of time to get to a spot where you can go and reconnect to these areas. And I don't think as part of that, I've sold that vision particularly well. I feel like I've done an okay job selling through stories of how other councils, like Blue Mountain City Council, has done some amazing stuff with how they have upskilled teams to do great work in this space, very cost effectively, very easily, literally sketching designs on a Macca's napkin.
Yep.
And those sorts of stories, like, I can see how stories like that have had success, because it's like, oh yeah. But I feel there's a space for this particular story of the vision of, well, actually, it's not just about a few stormwater treatment systems anywhere on a token attempt. It's about spots like this and being able to get back into them and down into them and enjoy them directly.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think, you know, that time frame sort of thing, you can work on multiple, not being like a Doctor Who's, you know, Time Lord working on multiple times, but
Sure.
you know, one of the things that I love about landscape architecture, and that many people love, is that we work with the element of time.
Okay.
You know, we don't work with static things or processes.
Yes.
So time is just always part of the mix. So most of the projects that come out of the end of a pen in our office, we'll never see it like that. And you know, most of in that state that we envisage it at its mature form. Same as, you know, most of a great park or a great garden or something that we might go and that's an exemplar in our industry that we learn from, that we go and visit on an overseas trip. The person who commissioned it, paid for it, built it and designed it, never saw it like that. In its mature form, or at a highly evolved system.
So how in that world, so I can see like people selling the grand vision that's going to come to fruition in 50 or 100 years. But when the thing that gets built immediately isn't like that, how does the profession or the industry deal with the discontinuity, like with the, I suppose, the client or the public being like, look, we're kind of sold that. We've got this. How does your profession deal with that?
Part of it's about having the conversation through the process. That we are designing for that, but that there's you know, plants have to grow.
Yes.
It really is that simple.
Yep.
You know, and you know, even something as prosaic as wanting to submit a project in an award system. Say we worked on that house across the road and the architect designed that house and we did the garden for it, and they wanted to enter it in this year's architecture awards. It would look perfect, but we wouldn't do it because all it looks like is that we're really good at specifying mulch.
Right.
So we come back in 5 years' time and it's starting to look okay. In 20 years' time, it's starting to look a bit better. So it really is about understanding and having those conversations up front.
So it strikes me that for a local government, that might be about having the conversation in water sensitive urban design of, look, we're heading to this, like long term, we're heading to this point. The reality is, though, at the moment, we don't actually know how to get there. So the story should be less about, here we have to build these things because they are the be all and end all, and more the story of, hey, look, we've got to try stuff and we need to create enough opportunities to try from which we can learn and evolve and change, so that eventually we figure out how to get to that long-term vision. But because if we don't try stuff now, we can't learn, because that's the reality of learning. You have to pick up the violin to learn to play it. You have
but it's
to
also
build
about the breadth of that conversation. You know, if we want to talk about water-sensitive urban design, it's not just water quality. You know, it's that old chestnut. This seat here, next to the creek, is part of water-sensitive urban design. That pathway along there is water-sensitive urban design, because they both enable people to come into this creek corridor.
Yes.
So I think it's really about, you know, remembering that it's a broad conversation, and the same as it's not just focusing on the little thing that we can do now and not just putting all your eggs in the long-term basket. You know, there's things that can happen along the way. I
feel like that's a lovely thought to end on. Is there anything we've missed there, or shall we?
No, not for today's episode.
Not for today's,
but
right.
By the time we get to, I think, number 99, we'll have crossed a few more things off my list.
You know what episode number I'm up to now? It's like 230
I know, it's great. Well done.
It's crazy.
Been a great achievement.
It's crazy. So, okay. Look, Amalie, thank you for taking the time to essentially have a chat about having a chat.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Jack.
No worries. I really appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in. Last thought. If people want to contact you, if people got questions, where do people find you?
Website,
Website.
Landscapeology.com.au.
Okay, easy.
Thanks.
Find Amalie there. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Before you go, our best episodes come from your questions. This knowledge base, these discussions that are Ideanthro improve with your contribution. So if there's a topic, an idea, a concept that you would like us to explore, come and ask us. You know where to find us. www.ideanthro.com/contact. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and that place you get your good podcasts from. You know where to find us. We look forward to hearing from you. We'll see you soon.